Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining tonight's virtual public meeting on the upcoming spring 2022 MBTA service changes. My name is Angel Donahue Rodriguez, and I'll be moderating tonight's meeting. First, the MBTA team has a presentation, and we ask you to please hold all comments until the end of that presentation. Second, we'd like to remind everyone that this meeting is being audio and visually recorded, but we made available publicly. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few meeting controls for folks who are not familiar with Zoom. Next slide, please. We have closed captions for this meeting. If you do not see the captions, please press the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen to get them started. Next slide. If at any point during the meeting you have any technical questions about Zoom or the accessibility features of today's meeting, please chat tech support. We also offer Spanish interpretation during this meeting. In order to select English or Spanish in audio in your meeting/webinar controls, click interpretation and click the language that you would like to hear. Wait for Spanish interpreters to translate and then go.
Hola, si tiene una pregunta técnica sobre Zoom o las funciones de la reunión, utilice la función de chat. Si ve abajo, hay un icono que parece mensaje de texto y debajo debe de decir chat. Le va a picar ahí para poder mandar mensaje. Nuestro asistente técnico, que está bajo el nombre de Tech Support, intentará solucionar su problema y se pondrá en contacto con usted. También ofrecemos interpretación en español durante esta reunión. Para seleccionar audio en inglés o en español en los controles de su reunión seminario web. Haga clic en interpretación que tiene icono de un mundo y haga clic en el idioma que le gustaría escuchar.
On today's call, we're joined by Melissa DeLay, Senior Director of Service Planning. We'd also like to acknowledge any elected officials or staff who might join the call and the countless MBTA staff who have worked tirelessly to put this presentation together in this schedule for the spring 2022. Melissa?
Thanks, Angel. So we're here to, next slide, please, talk about the upcoming changes for the spring schedules starting later this month, or depending on mode later in the spring. So on the whole, the MBTA is proposing similar bus service levels in spring 2022 compared to winter 2022, though there may be some reallocations between routes due to crowding or travel time changes. We also are very, very excited to have the Green Line extension first branch open to Union Square on March 21st. So note that date doesn't quite align perfectly with the other schedule changes because it's a little bit later because of the ongoing construction that is still being completed. And then we have a number of other changes that are related to roadway construction in the areas and other detours. And lastly, we have a number of travel time updates in general because we saw during COVID, travel times had decreased in many parts of our service area. And now that travel is picking back up, those travel times are increasing. So we're updating our travel times to reflect those changing travel conditions. Next slide, please. I also would like to give a very brief update. When we were here to speak about the December schedule changes, there had been a number of changes related to an operator shortage. So I wanted to give some updates on our efforts to increase HR, our human resources capacity, and our ability to hire specifically for bus operators. We've increased the size of our human resources recruiting department with 10 new recruiters brought on since Labor Day, with more joining shortly. We have a dedicated team to look into the operator hiring issues. We've had many other initiatives with outreach. You can hardly travel without seeing a billboard offering, with advertising for the openings that we have available that are touting the sign-on bonus that we have. We've been able to partner with our RMV partners to help with outreach to CDL permit holders. We've been also working on outreach with unions and others to think about, are there structural changes that we can think about to make the bus operator classification more appealing for the long term, and in particular for the spring schedules that are starting later this month. We've promoted 65 part-time operators to full-time, so changing the split of how many part-time employees we have versus full-time, so that we can try to get more productivity from the existing workforce that we have and to make work more appealing. And that's in addition to the 75 that we had just promoted net as of the winter. So that's, I can do math, 140 promotions that we've had over the past 6 months that we're very excited about. Next slide, please. So getting into our specific mode updates. First off, we'll talk about the rapid transit system. Next slide, please. Here also, I'll pause just for a moment. This is one of the newest subway stations. It's not yet open to revenue service. This is a photo of Union Square. As I mentioned, our Green Line extension to Union will be opening shortly. So very excited to have some visuals of the testing that is underway. Next slide, please. Also, this is a slide that shows ridership trends on the rapid transit network. In general, we've been pretty stable at about 50 to 60% of our pre-COVID ridership levels. You can see that ridership dipped some in December, which typically happens with holiday travel, though the dip in January is probably a bit steeper than usual. We had a lot of change in activity due to Omicron, but that surge has for the most part passed. So we're now kind of resuming our normal February uptick in ridership that we typically see. But we're still below pre-COVID levels. We'll see how things stabilize as we move into the spring and as more folks resume traveling. Next slide, please. For the spring service changes, on Monday, March 21st, that will be the first day that the Union Square branch of the E-Line opens. When it opens, it will open as the E-Line. So those trains will operate through the Central Subway and continue to Heath Street. Though that's a temporary condition while we have only the one branch open. Later this year, when the Medford Branch opens, that will be the E-Line. And at that point, Union Square will switch to be the D-Line. So for now, on March 21st, again, Union Square will be opening as the E-Line, but again, that's going to switch to be the D-Line later when the Medford Tufts branch opens. At the time when Union Square opens, the new Lechmere station will open, which is across the street from the old Lechmere station. And also Science Park Station will reopen to train service. It's been replaced, as has Lechmere service, temporarily with bus service during construction. So when Union Square comes back online, Lechmere and Science Park will reopen as well. In addition to the GLX changes, we also have some runtime updates that will take effect with the start of the spring schedule. So those begin on Monday, March 14th. We only made weekday changes. And that's related to the travel times that it takes to get from point A to point B. As we had seen on the bus network also, during COVID, the travel times on the Green Line had decreased substantially when there was much lowered ridership. And now that ridership is picking up, those travel times are picking up as well. So these are minor schedule adjustments to kind of reflect how long it takes to get from point A to point B. Next slide, please. Specific to the Lechmere station reopening, we will have some slight changes to the bus services, routes 69, 80, 87, and 88. Today, those routes are operating out of, I'll call it the old Lechmere station, which is just south of Monsignor O'Brien Highway. The new Lechmere station is just north of Monsignor O'Brien Highway. So the bus service will be diverted to use the new busway, which is located off of Water Street, again, just north of O'Brien Highway. Now there's a possibility that the Route 69 may have a temporary diversion that will be in place for a short period of time after the buses are relocated to New Lechmere. Because there's other ongoing construction related to the Cambridge Crossing development, the bus 69 will not be able to use Morgan Ave to exit the busway onto Water Street and get back to Cambridge Street. So there may be a temporary diversion for a short period of time. But this is showing the final condition with all 4 routes using the new busway located at New Lechmere Station. Next slide, please. We also have 2 photos here. This is an image from the GLX team showing the new Lechmere station. So it's an elevated station. This is taken looking west. You can see the new REI, Cambridge Crossing development there on the right. You can see Monsignor O'Brien Highway all the way to the left. And if you were to kind of pan just a little farther off to the left side of the page, that would be where the existing or the old Lechmere station is located. So we're across the street and elevated so that the trains could then line up with the green line right of way that we have. On the next slide, we have an image of Union Square Station. This photo is taken, we'll say, from near Prospect Street. So this is looking east, inbound. You can imagine if you're on Prospect Street coming from Union Square and you either took the elevator or the stairs down to the station level, you would look at that directional sign. You can see that there are arrows indicating which train will be departing first. And from here, it would take you on to Lechmere Station and then Science Park and into the city. So super excited about this, and we hope you'll have an opportunity to try out the service when it begins operation. March 21st is the expected opening date. Next slide, please. One last update on the rapid transit side. We also have a number of fare transformation projects going on. The fare vending machine update has been progressing. All the orange line, all the blue line, and all the red line stations have been completed. The green line is about 98% complete, and the silver line is 48% complete. So overall, on the rapid transit side, we're about 89% complete. So these new fare vending machines are going to allow folks to be able to purchase a Charlie card at the machine, as opposed to needing to already have had a Charlie card issued to you. And also they can reload Charlie cards as well. We have the new tappable Charlie ticket, which replaces the former insertable magnetic stripe Charlie ticket. And these different fare media can be used to tap and go at the fare gates and fare boxes with the tappable symbol. So for more information, please visit mbta.com/fare transformation. Next slide, please. The next section relates to changes to the bus network. Next slide, please. On the bus side, very similar to the rapid transit ridership trends, we've been fairly stable. There was the usual typical dip around the holidays, around Christmas and New Year's. And again, a bit of a dip in January when there was the Omicron surge. But ridership is picking up in the month of February. And then on the next slide, you can also see some of the comparison of ridership between routes, between their kind of typical pre-COVID levels and their current levels. It's interesting to see that some routes, like the 28, which has the free fare program in place, sponsored by the city of Boston, is at 100% of its pre-COVID levels. Most routes on average are around 60 to 70% of their pre-COVID service levels, but some routes where we have a lot more sort of 9 to 5 Monday through Friday work commuters. For example, the SL2 is one that serves the South Boston waterfront area, or other routes that perhaps serve more work from home commuters or folks who have hybrid schedules have seen bigger drop-offs in ridership, whereas folks that have more in-person work, we've seen ridership that's more durable. Next slide, please. So in terms of the schedule changes, there's a few different buckets of changes that I'll talk about. So some of these are, again, related to construction that's coming up. Some of these are related to the Green Line extension opening and the reopening of rail service to Lechmere Station and the new Lechmere busway. And then we have a number of runtime updates due to growing congestion, and then a few other small updates that are sort of one-offs that I'll go into more details on. In general, the spring bus schedules start on Sunday, March 13th, with the exception of there are some changes that start on a weekday, which would be Monday the 14th, or there are the GLX related changes that start the following week when GLX opens on March 21st. So next slide, please. I'll get into more detail on the specific changes. We have several routes that have increased frequency. So that would be the routes 116 and 117 that connect Maverick and Maverick Square in East Boston with Revere. And also the 450, which serves Salem and the Highland Ave corridor. In general, those are both places where we've seen very durable ridership, and the 450 had a combination of it needed more travel time for the congestion that we were seeing. So it needed to have more resources applied to maintain appropriate frequencies. There are some routes where we've seen reduced frequency. In the case of the 77, that's actually not because of a planning change. That's actually related to construction. So because of roadway construction in Cambridge and Watertown, the 77A short trips that operate between North Cambridge and Harvard have been eliminated. And actually, that's also related to the 71 and 73 routes operating with hybrid buses as opposed to the trackless trolleys because of that roadway construction. So when we say reduced frequency, that's just the 77A trips that connect to the North Cambridge car house. There were also some frequency adjustments to the routes 120 that operates in East Boston, the 442, the short trips in particular that operate to the Swampscott line, and the 455. And that was in order to sort of shift some resources to help out the route 450, which needed additional time. So we still expect that the frequency should be appropriate to the ridership that we're seeing. So things should be okay. With the Route 32, this is a change in frequency to show, and it's actually getting back to the type of service that was running pre-COVID. So during COVID, when ridership numbers were down and we were making really quite a lot of schedule changes, we had everything on the Route 32 operating the full route from Wolcott Square all the way into Forest Hills, and had stripped out the we call them the short turn trips that only started at Cleary Square and ran to Forest Hills. And those had previously only run sort of during rush hours and kind of during school period when there's a lot more demand. There's a lot of students in particular traveling that in the shorter portion of the route between Cleary Square and Forest Hills. So we're resuming that service pattern that has the mix of the short Cleary Square trips and the longer Wolcott trips, which means that we'll get better frequency in that portion of the route and slightly less frequency, but still enough for the number of passengers who are traveling from the Wolcott Square area. We also have a number of routes that have trip changes, and these are those changes I had mentioned that were related to travel times. So this just means that, you know, to get from point A to point B to point C is now taking just a few minutes longer because congestion is climbing back up. Still not to levels necessarily that we saw pre-COVID, but more than what we had seen kind of during the depths of COVID when there were many more people staying home. So we're seeing travel times tick back up, and we're just reflecting those travel time increases on any of these routes that we're calling with trip changes. So that would be routes 1, route 7, 21, 31, 39, 45, 47, 52, 66, 68, 92, 94, 96, 111, 119, 220, 225, and SL3. So if you have any more questions about these particular route changes, you can see more at mbta.com/service changes. We have a few more changes on the next slide to go through. These are routes that have routing changes, which means they may be, the path that they take is changed slightly. There's one trip on the Route 9 that is going to be staying on Melnia Cass Boulevard to Mass Ave rather than going through the Boston Medical Center. That's because this trip has a lot of students traveling. It's a very specific trip, and we think it's a better match of the ridership to the demand at this time of day. We also have a number of changes to the 34 and the 34E. So the 34 today ends at Dedham Mall, and there are a number of trips that are getting extended to Dedham Square, with the last stop will be Washington Street at Sylvia Lane. The 34E, this is a carryover from our Better Bus project changes that were, we actually talked about these in 2019, and the changes, most of the changes from that 2019 preliminary changes list had been implemented in fall of 2019 and in winter of 2020. But this one is a sort of carryover to eliminate the Route 1A trips between Washington Street and Walpole Center, and rather have those travel on Washington Street instead, which is what they do for the rest of the service day, so that we can have a single, more consistent service pattern and improve legibility of the route. And then the last of the route changes that we mentioned already is that the 69, 80, 87, and 88 will use the new Beechmere station when the station opens. So all these, again, most of these changes take effect on March 13th, except for the GLX changes, which are expected to take effect on March 21st. Next slide, please. The routing changes, the 71 and 73 will be operating with diesel hybrid buses, and that's because of roadway construction in actually several projects in both Cambridge and in Watertown that are requiring that the overhead catenary wire be de-energized. But what that means, because at Harvard, the diesel hybrid buses don't have left side doors, so we're going to be changing the route slightly so that we can board folks on the right side, so that no one's having to step across a busway in front of a bus, because our busways aren't designed to allow for that movement. So to board at Harvard, we're going to be using the upper busway instead of the lower busway, which if folks are familiar with using the 71 or 73 on Sundays, it's going to be making the Sunday boarding location the 7-day-a-week boarding location instead. So during weekday rush hours, trips will both drop off and pick up at that upper busway at the same time. We call that a snap. And then at other times, the trips will drop off and then they will drive around to the layover location. And this is sort of back end things. And then when the bus is ready to go after they hold their time, they will come to that same location in the upper busway where we currently board on Sundays. And that's where customers will board again at the off-peak times. Also, in a departure, because of the left side doors, the 71, 73, when they're operating with trackless trolleys, folks pay when they exit on the outbound, which is kind of confusing. Once folks have gotten used to this, it makes sense. So we wanted to flag that this is different. Once we switch to the hybrid buses, outbound passengers will pay when they board, just like every other bus in our system where you pay upon entry. So but that is a different way of paying for the bus with the planned change, but it'll make it more normal. We have also a handful of trips on the 112 that will be changing on Sunday mornings. Pretty much everything will serve Market Basket and Chelsea Station. Currently, there were a few trips that omitted it, dating from back when the old Mystic Mall hours didn't open until later, but Market Basket is open earlier, so we're gonna have the same trip operate for the full day, the same pattern, operate for the full day on Sundays and serve the Market Basket on all trips. On Saturday, we also have a change to the Route 350 bus. This is related to serving Northwest Park. That's where the Wegmans and 3rd Ave area are located in Burlington. We had some trips omit the Northwest Park in the morning, but folks are traveling there and also to the Burlington Mall, which is on the way. So those outbound trips will now be more like the normal trips. And then lastly, SL2 has a construction related change in that it will no longer loop the 88 Black Falcon Ave parking lot due to construction project there. Instead, we'll be stopping just outside of the parking lot. There's a bus stop that we can use, and trips will start and end at Northern Ave. Next slide, please. I also have a slide here to talk about the fare-free program for routes 23, 28, and 29. Service on these 3 routes will be fare-free for 2 years, starting March 1st through February 29, 2024. And this is funded by the City of Boston. These routes travel through Roxbury and Dorchester and connect folks to Ruggles and Jackson Square, Mattapan, and Ashmont. In order to make sure that we're providing the same benefits to our paratransit users, any ride paratransit trips will also be fare-free for customers who are making trips that both start and end within 3/4 of a mile of routes 23, 28, and 29. There's a requirement that we can't charge a ride user more than twice what the fare is for the regular local service. So because the local service is free, the exact same ride trip would also be free. And then any transfers to and from other routes with bus routes or rapid transit are not included in this program. So folks would need to pay a regular fare if they're transferring to another bus or another subway line. Next slide, please. We also have a brief update here about the bus network redesign project. That is a project that we have been working on for a couple years now. And this actually started before COVID, but we've been doing a lot of analytics since then, and we're getting ready to start having more conversations with the public, starting later this spring, probably around May. We expect to have an outreach process and release the map to the public, and have several months of discussion. And we absolutely are planning on having a robust public process, lots of feedback, and making changes to the map. But I wanted to give you a sort of sneak preview on things that are coming up. So we're looking at how we can use the bus network to make service that's more frequent, more reliable, and connect where people really want to go, make service that's easy to use. Next slide, please. In general, we're planning for the draft network to be released to the public this spring. We'll finalize that network coming up this summer and into fall, with implementation of this starting later in 2022 or early 2023. But it'll be, we're planning on 5 years of implementation. So over the following 5 years, we would potentially, roll out certain geographies where we're modifying routes, or making other, establishing new bus stops in some cases, or making other changes. Next slide, please. We also have some changes coming up for the commuter rail program. Next slide. So effective on Monday, February 7th, bikes will be allowed on board any Middleborough, Kingston, or Greenbush line train at all times in both directions. Bikes may be stored in any available space, but be mindful of keeping ADA seats free and accessible. And for more information about that, you can read more at mbta.com/bikes. This is a change. In the past, we'd had more restrictions on peak trains and when folks could bring bicycles on. So this is providing more accessibility to bicycles. Also in late spring 2022, new electric fare gates for commuter rails will begin operation in North Station's concourse, and new schedules for spring will be available in May of 2022. Next slide, please. We have some changes on the ferry network as well. Effective from Memorial Day weekend on Saturday, May 28th, weekend service resumes for the F2H service, which serves Hingham Hall, Logan Airport, and Long Wharf. That's a seasonal weekend service that only operates in the summer, starting at Memorial Day. Next slide, please. So next steps, here we are, it's March 1st, and we're having the public meeting on upcoming changes. March 13th, the spring schedules take effect on the bus program. March 14th, the new schedules take effect on the Green Line with new run times, but those were only on weekdays, so that's why it starts the 14th. On March 21st, the Green Line extension opens, and also those related busway moves happen concurrently. May 28th is when the F2H ferry resumes weekend service, and then upcoming in May, the new spring schedules will take effect on commuter rail. So those are all the changes I have, so I will turn it back over to Angel.
Thanks, Melissa, for that great presentation. So I think there, I don't know if there was one more slide that we had left to show. Right. So we've kind of now arrived at the portion where people can obviously ask questions. So if you have any questions, as I said, you can also submit them on the chat. So again, thanks for joining us tonight, for sharing your comments. There obviously there are going to be many opportunities for folks to share some of their feedback. So if folks want to, I'm going to call on folks, and I'm going to go over real quickly about how the presentation is going to go. So if you have any questions, they can be submitted obviously on the chat pod. While we may not get to all questions, all comments will be part of the official record and will be shared with MBTA leadership. To make a comment out loud, you must virtually raise your hand. To do this on the computer, just simply press Alt-Y or click the raise hand button at the bottom center of your screen. On a mobile device, tap the raise hand button at the bottom center of your screen. And then on the phone, you can do so by dialing *9. Once you raise your hand, you'll be added to a queue with others who have raised their hands, and I will call folks on a first come first served basis. When it is your turn to speak, we just kindly ask, I will say your last name or the last 4 digits of your phone number, and we kindly ask to keep folks their comments to about 2 minutes, so we can get to as many people as possible. And I will obviously let you know once I'm unmuting you. If you're in a computer or a mobile device, a box will pop up at the center of your screen. You will need to confirm that you are unmuted before you begin speaking. And if you're on the phone, an automated recording will let you know that you are being unmuted. You may speak as soon as that recording finishes. Once you are unmuted, everyone in the meeting can hear you. Before making your comment, please slowly state your name and any organizational affiliation. And please remember to speak slowly, as we have interpreters working with us this evening. As soon as you are finished, you will be muted again. And we'll begin the comment period now. Bear with me 1 second as I see some hands raised. The first person I am going to call on is Tracy Hunt. I'm going to ask him to unmute now.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I work in the Fenway. I also live in the Fenway. I am asking, I did not see the 55 bus on the bus route there, and I'm just curious on what's going on with that. I also had a question in regards to the machines at the train stations, like the when I went there on Mass Ave, you know, sometimes the cash machine is all like having problems. Mm-hmm. How come all the machines do not accept cash? Because that would really be helpful. Mm-hmm. And also, again, so the 55 bus, what's going on with that? We're very concerned about that. And I see you laughing, Melissa. So what's going on, girl?
I can speak to the 55, though I was sharing information about the fare transformation from my colleagues on the fare transformation team. So I don't actually have an answer on that one. We can take that comment down and get your contact information perhaps so that we can get an answer. But I can speak to the 55. So as many folks know, we have several changes that were implemented across the network during COVID because of a number of different things, because of the operator shortage. And one of those changes is the Route 55 is not operating for the full service day. It's operating a more limited set of hours, but we have other routes that are also either suspended or restructured in different ways. So it's not a unique issue to the 55. So we're not in a position with the hiring that we have made so far to be able to program in additional restorations this rating. So it's pretty much steady state, but we recognize that we're not restored the 55 to the full span of service.
Yeah, we're
And
just concerned because with all the like development going on in the Fenway and all those people, they're gonna be, coming into the Fenway, they're gonna, wanna use that bus. And, I know the Red Sox is definitely really supportive of making sure that it does go into full schedule because, all their fans are gonna be coming into the Fenway and they use it from the Park Street coming into the Fenway. So, I mean, it's going to be really, really bustling in the Fenway. And I know, and I witnessed it myself by coming to work every day, that I seen completely full at 7 a.m. in the morning. So it really does need to get restored back so that, people can use it. Because, I mean, we're really, I know with all the developments going on and their plans of having all these, people coming in, it's just going to be, and then we have seniors who are relying on that service, or, earlier than 10 a.m. because the ride sometimes doesn't pick them up.
for sure. Now,
Right?
we also recognize that the 55 is one transit option in the Fenway neighborhood among several transit options. So there's still the 60 and the 65 and the 8 and the 19 bus up and down Brookline Ave. There's also the Green Line at Kenmore with the B, C, and D branches, and also the D branch stop at Park Drive. So there are a number of options, depending on where folks are going, that are within, a quarter mile of most of the Fenway neighborhoods. But we recognize that, especially for some of our seniors, that's why we had focused on the restoration in the midday, because we recognize the importance of the 55 to many of the seniors who live in the sort of geographically isolated neighborhood.
Yeah, but if their appointments
south of
start
the-
earlier, yeah, I understand, but their appointments start earlier, or if they have evening appointments, they definitely need it, full service. And then you have people who have mobility issues that can't walk all the way to Brookline Ave. Or, it's just really difficult for them to get over. I'm just gonna keep, pushing.
We,
for
we,
full
we,
restoration.
we certainly hear you, and
I know.
we'll be sharing those comments with our leadership.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And yes, Melissa, I'd love to talk to you more if you have, do you want me to give you my contact information?
We'll be putting on the group chat our
Okay.
public engagement email. It'll be easier for us to filter.
All right, so just send it through there. Okay.
Yep, they
thank
just
you.
put it up on the group chat there. Send the email and we'll make sure it gets to the right person.
Thank you.
Next, I'm going to ask, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name, Kunal Butler. I'm asking to unmute you now.
Hi, yep, that was accurate. I have two questions. One is on the hiring process or like the progress on hiring for the bus operators in general. Is there anywhere where we can see like what percent of like a goal has been reached or how much progress there is towards what the MBTA is looking for in terms of hiring? And the second is I use the 76 and 62 routes, and I've noticed a sizable amount of bus stops either to appear closed or have posted signs saying that they're closing. I don't really see why those stops would be closing, since they're in a fairly suburban area and they don't really incur much cost to either the town or the MBTA to exist. So is that a town level thing, or is that something the MBTA is doing to streamline service?
I can take a stab at the bus stop issue. I know there had been a round of stop closures that were being recommended for implementation with the spring schedules, but we've actually since paused some of those to allow further opportunity for discussion with some of the municipalities. Those were generally either inaccessible bus stops that were identified as being critical through our PATI process, which PATI is short for Program for Accessible transportation infrastructure or something like that. It's a survey that had been performed on all of the MBTA's bus stops, trying to identify which stops have the most barriers to accessibility and prioritizing those for either addressing by construction, or in some cases, if construction wasn't feasible or appropriate, some of those stops would have been resulted in stops being closed. So those were probably stop closures through Patty, but again, those had been, a number of those had been paused from spring implementation until summer.
All right, my kind of primary concern on that is the Wachusett Drive bus stop. Off of Lexington Center is more accessible than either of the two surrounding stops during the winter when there's snow and ice. The other two end up flooding or completely getting covered in ice. So I think depending on the season, it appears different, and just looking at that from that lens may yield some more results.
That's really useful feedback. Thank you.
And on the other piece, I don't have we don't have any materials regarding HR in that ongoing process. We don't have someone here from HR, but I would recommend, if there are particular questions that you have on that, again, that you reach out on our public engagement inbox. I think the IT support had put that email in our chat. That particular question is something we'll have to follow up, because we don't have that information off the top of our heads at the moment.
I think that would be something good to have public, just so the public knows if the MBTA is halfway towards their goal or only a quarter of the way, and almost have a sense of community and hiring and bringing more people on to the service.
Yeah, and I can tell you that, you know, we appreciate that, and we are certainly doing everything that we can, as you've seen, to hire as many folks as we possibly can to bring back that service. And we're going to continue to do everything we can going forward as well. So I would encourage you to email the public engagement at mbta.com, and we'll do our best to follow up with you on that.
Awesome.
Next, I am going to unmute Ethan Sokol.
Great.
Ethan?
Hello, I'm Ethan. I live in Stowe, Massachusetts, and my wife and I both work in the Cambridge area. I was hoping to see more information about planned service schedules for the commuter rail lines, including the Fitchburg line. So I know around the time of COVID, all express trains were cut and they still haven't come back. And I know many of us, like my wife and I, are waiting on the sidelines for express trains to return. And so I'm wondering if there are plans to try to return those to each of the different lines.
I would say that we're in the midst of figuring out at the moment what the commuter rail schedule changes are going to look like in the spring. So we can't speak to that. That is an active discussion, but we will take that feedback to folks that are developing that schedule in our leadership team and make them aware about the concerns that you have around the express trains. But right now, we just don't have we have a normal cycle on when we change our commuter rail schedule, and that's when we anticipate that to roll out, and that's sometime in May.
Okay,
so, but we will take that feedback back.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Next, I am going to unmute Matthew Wong.
Hello, my name is Matthew Wong. I currently live in Salem, New Hampshire, but I will be moving to Massachusetts shortly. I have a question related to the current commuter rail schedule, specifically the Haverhill line. I'm wondering, why does it seem like that it's like every other train on the line only runs as far as Reading, even in the middle of the day? Like, I could understand doing that at rush hour if you need to have more capacity, like to short-term the trains there to get them get back to Boston faster. but it doesn't make sense to be doing that on what seems like every other train in the middle of the day, because the result of that is that people from the stops further north, with my home stop being Andover, like we're stuck with this service that's kind of, but not really hourly, that doesn't even leave on consistent intervals. And like we have these weird like 70-minute gaps or even 90-minute gaps in service during the off-peak. And then if we're trying to get out of Boston and there's an issue on the rapid transit or something, or there's an issue with the train and we end up having to wait over an hour for the next train or bus, like that's like, so like and the fact of the matter is, like, Reading is only one track as well, so it's not like you can just store trains over there. So why is there so many short turns in the middle of the day on the Haverhill line, when all the other lines that I just hardly know that have short turns are only done at rush hour? Because you're leaving the people from Reading up to Haverhill through Andover and Lawrence with this, like I said, this weird service that doesn't even have a consistent clock face schedule.
Thanks for the feedback, Matt. I unfortunately don't have that level of expertise on the commuter rail. I would suggest we will take this question back. If you could provide your contact information in an email, and our public engagement team will reach out to you once we get an answer from our commuter rail team. We just don't have someone here at the moment that would be able to technically answer that. And I don't want to give you the wrong answer. Next, I am going to unmute Ishraq Budalev. I'm asking him to unmute you now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, first of all, thank you for the presentation. It's helpful to see all of the updates and changes that are occurring. So one question that I have is, aside from ridership levels and other quantitative data, what else goes into the MBTA's consideration when making decisions regarding route changes? And I ask this because, as Tracy had brought up earlier, I acknowledge that in regards to the 55 bus in the Fenway, there are low ridership levels, and I appreciate that thus far the route has been preserved to an extent. The bus hasn't been completely eliminated. But at the same time, I've been hearing a lot of concerns from residents, specifically seniors who rely on the bus to get to essential services. So I'm wondering, how much does the community input go into that decision-making process? Because while the quantitative data is important, I do feel as though the community input is as well. So I'm just wanting to understand that in a general sense and in specific regards to the 55. Thank you.
I'll just touch on it briefly, since we have talked about this a little bit, but it's a combination of community feedback that we're hearing and the ridership and resources information. But right now, for us, one of the biggest factors in much of our decision making is the availability of operators. We have about 90% of our pre-COVID service hours that we're able to provide, given the number of operators that we have. And we're just not at 100%. We've been slowly losing some operators during COVID who either because of retirements or other separations are no longer here with the MBTA, and we haven't been able to hire as quickly to replenish those operators. So that's the fundamental driver of why we're not back to our pre-COVID service levels. But then at the same time, we're also trying to look at our resources and consider, not just the ridership on a particular route, but how does the network serve individual neighborhoods? Is it one of several routes in a neighborhood, or is it like the only route that serves a neighborhood? Because kind of isolating a whole neighborhood, if it's the only route, is different than a different situation where there might be multiple options with the Green Line and several bus routes and the 55 all in close proximity. So it sort of depends on the availability of other options, if there are other options to be had.
Thank you, Melissa. That couldn't have answered any better than if I tried. There was a question on the chat from Matthew Wong around saying that I noticed there was one bus route that had over 100% ridership. How does that happen, and what does that mean?
Yeah, so it just means that the riders that we see now are more than the riders that we saw pre-COVID. That could be a couple of different things. So one of the cases that was right about 100% was the Route 28, where we made the bus route free, courtesy of the city of Boston. That attracted a lot of people, especially in some cases where maybe the 28 isn't the only bus that people could take. During the earlier pilot, the 28 was the only free bus, though starting now, actually, it's the 23, the 28, and the 29 that are free. But some people, you know, if they were price sensitive, might have let the 23 pass and would have waited to board the 28 so that they could have the free fare. So it could be that there was some diversion of riders from parallel routes, or perhaps some induction of new trips. Maybe if some people only had a 5 or a 10-minute walk, but they knew the bus was going to be free, maybe they would be more willing to wait for the bus as opposed to making perhaps a short walking trip. So that's one example. There are a couple other examples in the system where we've made some combinations of routes. I'm not quite sure what caused the 16. I think on my chart, it was actually the 16 that was over 100%, but we have some other examples where temporarily in Arlington, we suspended the 79 bus, but we said, hey, take the 77 instead. Or we restructured the 501 bus to replace the 503 bus. So there are a couple of places in the network where it's not just a matter of, ridership is down because of COVID, and it's sort of a barometer of how the ridership is returning, but sometimes the numbers are a little different because there have been other structural changes, or perhaps frequency improvements, or other fare changes that might have had the ridership change kind of disproportionate from what you would expect with the COVID recovery.
Thank you for that, Melissa. Another question we had on the chat: what is the current ETA for opening of the Medford branch of GLX? And that is this summer is when we anticipate that second branch will open up. And we'll have more information around that, obviously, as that time approaches, but this summer. Next, I am going to ask to unmute Yangzi Fang. I'm asking to unmute you now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. So I just have a couple questions. The first about the 34 proposed change, or the changes to 34. So how many trips approximately, or percentage-wise, are being extended to Dedham Square? And the second question related to that is, is that sort of part of the sort of residual from the Better Bus project where the 34 was proposed to be extended to Legacy Place? Is that related at all? And then a third question related to that is one of the rationales in the Better Bus project, during the Better Bus project rather, was that the 34 would terminate at Dedham Mall, and then the 34E would continue straight on Washington Street down into Walpole via Dedham, because sort of the extra wait time for people riding through, right, not going to who are not necessarily going into Dedham Mall. But now that the 34, at least some trips are now being extended past the mall, do you think that moving forward there might be sort of an opportunity to restore 34E service into the mall, such that there's greater frequency, right, for riders traveling between the mall and Forest Hills? And then separately from the 34 discussion questions, I just wanted to ask, since the schedules haven't been posted yet, whether the sort of the 52 trips in the afternoon rush hours have been sort of more evenly spaced out versus this past rating, where sort of there were gaps of an hour, and then the next bus would be 18 minutes and so forth. So a couple questions about 34, and then one question, or just a question about the 52, which will probably be answered in the next couple of days on the website.
Yeah, so the 34 changes were intended to be the carryover of the 2019 Better Bus Project plans to extend the 34 from the Dedham Mall to Legacy Place. It's a very important employment destination for folks who work there, and also for folks who might be doing shopping or going dining or to the movie theater and other entertainment things. There's the grocery store there. So this has long been on our wish list of places to extend service to. We thought we had a bus stop identified, so we had built the schedule, and the plans for the bus stop fell through after we had constructed the schedule. So this was intended to be the Legacy Place bus stop, but when the bus stop location fell through, we were sort of left without that option. So that's the backstory of why we have the extension to Dedham Square, but not to Legacy Place yet. We're still having active discussions and hoping that we can come up with a solution because we do think it's important, but we're not in a position to identify even what that timeline might be. And the other question was the 52. There were some irregularly spaced trips that had been identified in the winter changes. And thank you very much for flagging that. So we did, sorry, I didn't have that in my presentation. We did look at making those trips more evenly spaced while still trying to, there's a number of, I think it's Oak Hill Middle School, and there's a couple of middle schools and Mount Alvernia High School and others where we have a lot of student travelers. But I think the schedule changes for the winter had kind of tried to match those schedules too closely, and it resulted in very gappy, bunchy schedules on the remainder of the route. So when the new schedules are posted shortly, you should see that those trip times have been smoothed somewhat. Was that all the questions? Sorry, there were a bunch of questions. Did I miss anyone?
Yeah, I think the remaining question was sort of the 34E potentially going back into Dedham Mall now that the 34 is sort of being extended beyond Dedham Mall. Does that, if that makes sense? Like, is that being looked at potentially?
Yeah, well, that wasn't programmed into the upcoming schedule change. That's something that we can think about, though. When you're looping through the mall, because it's serving kind of the north side of the mall by the grocery store and the south side by the at-home side of the mall, when it's not the end of the line, it takes twice as long because we're doing it in both directions. So having it for the 34E would be a big time expense. So that's something that we'd have to just think about as we're thinking of, how many buses are on the line and what would the resulting frequency be. But, certainly for folks who are waiting there who are agnostic and don't care if it's a 34 or 34E, they just want to get to Forest Hills, I can definitely appreciate that would result in better frequency. So we'll share that with the team, but I'm not sure that we have the resources just yet for that.
I do not see any other raised questions from folks. Does anyone else have any other questions for the group? All right, hearing none. I think that we will call the meeting. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate it. You know, we hope that these service changes are helpful to folks. And again, I would encourage folks to reach out to our public engagement team. You can do so at MBTA public engagement. You can go on our website to get that information. And we look forward to hearing your further comments. And thanks again for everyone. I think that was just put on the chat now. So thanks, folks.